For 22 years, police have known how this man died. They know approximately how old he was. They know what he was wearing. And they know he was suffering from serious eyesight problems. But there is something they still don't know. His name. He is known only as the Echo Point Man. And that's where this story becomes difficult to tell. Because somewhere before he came to this place, he had a name. Someone gave him one. Someone knew his voice. Someone knew what he looked like before the years had changed him. But when police found him at Echo Point on the 4th of June 2004, they had no name to give him. Just a man, a backpack, the clothes he was wearing, and fragments of a life that, for more than 2 decades, have never been enough to tell police who he was. The investigation has never simply been about finding out how he died. It has been about finding out who died. And for 22 years, that question has remained unanswered. Until now, investigators have learned something new. Advanced DNA analysis has given police a possible clue to his background, suggesting he may have had Latvian or broader Middle European ancestry. And suddenly, after all these years, the Echo Point Man may be a little less anonymous. But there is still no name. No family has come forward to identify him. No one has been able to say, "That was my brother. That was my father. That was my friend." He remains unidentified. And somewhere, there may still be someone who has been wondering what happened to a man who disappeared from their life more than 20 years ago. This is the story of the Echo Point Man. On June 4, 2004, a bushwalker made a discovery at Echo Point that would remain a mystery for more than 2 decades. The remains belonged to a man who appeared to be over 60. He had no identification on him, no wallet with a name, no document that could tell police who he was, just the things he had with him and the place where he was found, his clothing, his backpack, and a few personal belongings that offered fragments of a life but no identity. Investigators eventually determined that his injuries were consistent with a fall from the area of the lookout. His death was given an open finding, and there was nothing to suggest that someone had simply come forward and claimed him. The man remained unidentified, but there was one thing in that backpack that told investigators something about what this man had been experiencing before he died. A handwritten note. It was addressed simply, "To whom it may concern." And then came a desperate description of his eyesight. He wrote that his eyesight was getting worse, that he was unable to work, and that he had been told there was no cure. Whatever had happened to him at Echo Point, police now had a glimpse into the difficulties he had been facing before his death. For years, investigators tried to put a name to the man. They had his physical description. They had his clothing. They had his belongings. They had a facial reconstruction. They had the circumstances of his death. But none of it was enough. And year after year, the Echo Point Man remained unidentified. Then, in 2026, after more than 2 decades, police now had a new clue from advanced DNA analysis. A new clue from his DNA. Advanced analysis suggested that the man may have had Latvian or broader Middle European ancestry. He was still unidentified. But suddenly, investigators had something new to work with. Possible background, a new direction, and perhaps somewhere, a connection to someone who has been missing a man for more than 20 years. Police are now appealing for information about a man who disappeared in the early 2000s, particularly anyone who may have connections to Latvia or broader Middle European heritage. But DNA can point investigators toward an answer. Cannot, by itself, give a dead man back his name. Somewhere, there may still be a family who has never known what happened to him. Somewhere, someone may have looked at an old photograph and wondered where he went. And somewhere, there may be a person who sees the face of the Echo Point Man and recognizes someone they thought was lost forever. After 22 years, police are asking one question. Who was he? For 22 years, the Echo Point Man had remained a mystery. Police knew where he had been found. They knew approximately how old he was. They knew what he had been wearing. They had his backpack. They had a facial reconstruction. They knew about the problems he had been experiencing with his eyesight. But none of those things gave him a name. And that is what makes an unidentified person so difficult to bring home. A name connects a person to everything that came before. Family, a birthplace, a childhood, friends, photographs, memories. Without one, even the most basic questions can become impossible to answer. Who was he? Where had he come from? And how did he end up alone at Echo Point? For years, investigators had only fragments. Fragments of a life that had somehow brought this man to the Blue Mountains. Then, more than 2 decades after his death, a new clue emerged. Advanced DNA analysis gave investigators a possible indication of his background. The results suggested that he may have had Latvian or broader Middle European ancestry. It was not a name. It was not an identification. But it was something investigators could work with. Possible background, possible direction, and perhaps somewhere beyond Australia, a connection to a family who had been missing someone for years. But the mystery was still there. He was still unidentified. And that distinction matters, because DNA can point investigators toward an answer, can narrow possibilities. It can open doors that seemed permanently closed. But DNA cannot, by itself, give a dead man back his name. For that, police need someone to recognize him, someone who remembers his face, someone who remembers his voice, someone who remembers the way he walked into a room, someone who might look at the reconstruction released by police and suddenly think, I know that man. And perhaps that is the most haunting possibility of all. Somewhere, there may still be a family who has never known what happened to him. Someone may have spent years wondering why a brother, a father, a friend, or a relative simply disappeared. There may be an old photograph tucked away in a drawer, a name written in an address book, a memory that has survived for more than 20 years. And somewhere, there may be a person who sees the face of the Echo Point man and realizes that the stranger in the police reconstruction is not a stranger at all. But until that happens, he remains what he has been for more than 2 decades. The Echo Point man. A man whose life is known only in fragments. A man who died far from the people who may have loved him. And a man whose identity has remained just beyond the reach of investigators. After 22 years, police are still asking the same fundamental question. Who was he? For more than 2 decades, investigators have tried to turn fragments into an identity. The Echo Point man was not completely without clues. There was his physical description. There were his belongings. There was the facial reconstruction. There was the note about his failing eyesight. And there was the location where his body was found. But none of those clues could answer the question that mattered most. Who was he? Police appealed for information. They released details about the man's appearance. They released a reconstruction of what he may have looked like. And they continued trying to establish where he had come from. But an unidentified person can disappear from the records in a way that is difficult to understand. Not because nobody is looking, but because the people who might recognize him may not know that they are looking for him. A family may have reported someone missing years ago. A friend may have assumed he simply left. Someone may have moved, changed their name, lost contact, or disappeared from the lives of the people who once knew them. And if nobody connects those 2 stories, the mystery continues. The man at Echo Point remains one unidentified person. Somewhere else, there may be another story about a person who disappeared. For years, those 2 stories may have existed separately. One belonged to the police. The other belonged to a family. And the challenge was finding the connection between them. That is why the new DNA information matters. It does not solve the mystery, but it gives investigators another way to search. Possible ancestry, possible direction. A reason to look again at old missing person cases and ask whether one of them could finally belong to the man found at Echo Point. After 22 years, the search is no longer only about identifying a dead man. It is about finding the people who may still be waiting for an answer. And somewhere in that search may be the name that has been missing since 2004. Today, the Echo Point man is still unidentified. But after more than 2 decades, investigators have a new direction. DNA analysis may have provided a clue to his ancestry, potentially linking his background to Latvia or the broader region of Central Europe. It is not an identification. It is not a name, but it may be enough to help someone recognize a connection that has been missing for 22 years. Police are asking anyone who believes they may know this man, or who has information about someone who disappeared in the early 2000s, to come forward. Because somewhere in the world, there may be a person who knows the face behind the reconstruction. And if that person comes forward, the Echo Point Man may finally become more than a description. He may become a name. For 22 years, that name has been missing. The question now is whether someone can finally give it back to him. Who was the Echo Point Man?